right. Hello, and welcome to our talk on how to succeed at jams without really trying. My name is Kartik.
I'm Eric.
And we are two parts of Finite Reflection Studios. So, if we're talking about how to succeed at a jam, we need to talk about what is success. And I think success is a very subjective term, and it depends on where you are in your life, what your skill level is, a lot of different aspects. How do you describe success, especially when it comes to a jam?
When it comes to a jam, you don't really think of success as winning or being the best at a jam. Success is, like Kartik said, supposed to be like personal to you, as well as finishing a game.
Yeah, I think that's one goal that everybody in a jam on your team can agree on, is that your goal should be that you're going to at least finish your game. The way you go about that might be different. Like, for instance, some of my goals in the past have been to just do all the art in the game, or to learn how to use Blender and use that to create all the 3D models for a game. How would you describe some of the goals you've had in the past for a jam?
Well, when you do a jam, you want to go in with a personal goal, something that you want to do. And it's fine if your personal goal is just, I'll be a part of a team that finishes a game. That's fine. But if you want to do something further than that, you need to decide what you can achieve in the time of the jam, and then talk with the rest of your teammates if you have a team, and make sure that your goals also line up with their goals. Otherwise, that game won't be made, and that's a goal not met.
Or the game will be made and your team will have just fought the entire time and it just won't be fun. So you want to make sure definitely that your goals don't invalidate or cause other people to not be able to accomplish their goals at the same time. So you've figured out your goals. This you hopefully did even before you arrived at the jam. Well before you have thought about this and factored it into what your plans are. But now that the jam is about to start, you want to make sure that you have planned out what kind of tech you're going to have and what kind of software you're going to bring and how you're going to use it. Make sure that it's installed and running, and you don't need to like update your computer at the last second when the jam starts, because that's just going to waste a whole lot of time. How do you get ready for a jam?
Well, it depends on your goal, but for me, when I'm coding, what I want to make sure I'm doing is not spending precious jam time doing things that I could have done ahead of time. And these are things that I wouldn't have got out of the jam anyway. Setting up a GitHub repo, installing software, writing the same piece of code I've written 1,000 times is not beneficial for me and for what I want to learn. And so I want to make sure to get all of that kind of setup work done and tested even ahead of the jam, provided that whatever I've written or am bringing falls within the rules that whatever the jam says is okay or is not okay.
Right. There's one, of course, thing that you can always do regardless of any type of jam, which is plan your self-care schedule for the jam. Because it's going to be a marathon of a lot of coding and a lot of work and a lot of arting and whatever else you're going to be doing on this jam. You want to make sure that while you're doing all these things, you are doing it in a healthy way and you're not pushing yourself beyond your limits and wasting time worrying about, oh, where are we going to get food from? Are we planning on sleeping at this location-based jam, or are we planning on cooking during this time? All those little questions, if you can plan them out before you start the jam, you can worry less about it during the jam and end up feeling a lot more healthy and a lot less hungry. And I think another thing that you want to do is set someone to be the project lead. Now, this is assuming you have a team going into the jam. If you don't have a team going into the jam, you can do this after the jam has started. That's fine. But the way that I think of a project lead isn't someone who's there to be a creative leader or creative designer who's saying, do this way, do that way, and got a tight noose around the entire project. Their role is more to just be accountable, be the person who holds everyone accountable. Be the person to say, hey, Eric, like, we talked 2 hours ago, you said you were finishing the AI over here. How's that going? And if you avoid the more ego part of being a project lead, you'll be fine. You won't have to worry about too much team conflict when you have someone trying to control everything at once. So yeah, now the jam has begun. You have got your team together, you got all your equipment and stuff ready, and you all know what your own goals are, but now the theme is announced, and now you have to come up with what you're actually going to make. How do you do your brainstorming?
Well, the very first thing you got to do is just start throwing out all ideas, no matter what they are, because even some idea that you don't go with in the end could be the jumping off point that you use to get to the idea that you actually are making your game out of. So there's nothing at this point that's bad. Everything is on the table, everything's open for discussion. There doesn't have to be any thought behind what you said whatsoever, as long as ideally it lines up with the theme. However, we found that what's not fun is to be making the same game as like 6 or 7 other teams also in this jam. So generally, it's a good idea to try to avoid being too on the nose with the theme, and also being so far away from the theme that when people ask what the theme was and you tell them, they don't look at you like, what are you, do you understand what the theme means?
Yeah, and also when you're coming up with these ideas, you want to make sure that they are playing to your team's strengths. That you, if you don't have a sound designer on your team, that you don't go and make a rhythm game, or that you don't go and make a game that is based on sound at all. If you have more artists than developers, then play to that strength. How can you utilize the artist as much as possible and not overburden the programmer with having to do a really involved RTS or something like that. And the other thing that I like to do when I'm doing brainstorming is, so I imagine brainstorming as like a tree. And when you start out, you got the trunk of the tree is the theme, and everyone sort of has like these random little offshoot ideas that are these individual things. And what tends to happen in a good brainstorming session is one person shouts out a random, maybe half-baked idea, and everyone else kind of piggybacks off the idea and says, oh, what if it did this? Oh, what if it had this mechanic? And then you can imagine that as like the branches of the tree continuing to branch out further and further away from the root of this tree. Once you reach the end, you usually end up with a really cool idea, and an idea that you might want to just, great, let's start making it right now. But you want to be careful. You want to be cautious about jumping to that idea too quickly, because there may be many other ideas that you just haven't taken the time to explore. So that's why I wrote backtrack and branch, because once you've gotten that, you want to write that down and make sure you don't forget it, and write down all the details that you got to their point, and then backtrack, back up that branch, back up all the way that you came from all those piggybacks, and then try a completely different direction. Force yourself to say, okay, we've really tried to talk it through. What if it was a platformer? Let's go another direction. What if it was a first-person shooter? I don't know. And push your team to think creatively in other directions. What you may discover is, nope, platformer it is. That was the best idea. Or you may discover, actually, we didn't realize we were going to have this much fun making this other genre game. So it's an important way to make sure that you have a nice variety in your list of games. And what do you do once you have that list of games?
So once you have the list, it's time to narrow it down and pick one that you're going to try to stick with. So you can do that using a few techniques. One, how feasible is the idea you're going to make? It could sound really cool to make a first-person shooter platformer puzzler that also has augmented reality built in, but it's not very feasible. So cut that one onto the next one. When you're discussing as a team a certain idea, you need to talk about what you individually could do on it and how it meets your goals, and then if it also meets collectively the team's goals. Yeah. And then the last thing is, are you excited about it? Because people want to work on a game that they're excited for and not have it feel like a chore or work that they have to do.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the key things about feasibility that can determine whether or not it is the most feasible idea is if you're able to make a prototype out of it in under 2 hours. Those first 2 hours, when I say first, I mean actually after you've done your brainstorming, 2 hours after you've done brainstorming, and once you pick your idea, those 2 hours should be spent just getting a boxy, untextured, no art prototype done. And by done, I mean within that amount of time, you want to be able to pick up a controller or a keyboard and mouse and start moving about and start being able to do things in your game. And it should feel good and it should feel fun already. Now, it's a tough skill to be able to make a prototype in 2 hours, let alone a fun prototype in 2 hours. But even if you're a more novice game developer, you should be able to get a feeling, a sensation about, hey, you know what, even though this is just a bunch of boxes, I can see where this is going. And if you don't think that you can do a prototype in 2 hours of your concept might be too complicated to complete in 48 hours. What else do you think about when you're making your first prototype?
Well, I mean, the prototype feeling good is very important because most of the time, what we've learned is if the initial prototype didn't feel good, it doesn't matter what art or fancy graphics or whatever else you throw in there, it's still going to not feel good even if it looks better than just a box. But to get to that point, it's fine if you have bad code in your project. At this point, it's a game jam. It's going to happen. It should happen so that you can be moving faster, because you would want to spend 1 to 2 hours, hard coding things, putting a bunch of references everywhere, instead of 6 to 7 hours building a proper database and structure of your game, and then finding out that the game doesn't work and you need to scrap it.
Yeah, and speaking of scrapping what you have, this is your really one and only opportunity to do so. You can't afford to do this 4 or 5 or further hours into the jam, because at that point you've really lost too much time to be able to finish a quality game. The sooner you're able to get this prototype and playtest it with your teammates, the sooner you're able to discuss and see, okay, either this is absolutely not good and we need to pick another one of the ideas that we had, or it's okay, here's some ideas that we have to sort of finagle the idea to make it a little bit more feasible, or maybe make it a little bit more fun. Or, hey, you know what? We did it. This prototype is gold. We know exactly where this is going to go. And if you're not able to play it as soon as possible, it's probably a clear sign that maybe this idea wasn't the right one. So now you've gotten past that step. You've got your prototype done. You've definitely got your idea sort of solidified, and you can start to see the long-term goal of what this finished thing is going to look like. But you have to break that down into tiny little steps to be able to get there. And I think one of the most common mistakes that I see in some jam teams is a hyper-focus on that plan and on all those steps and trying to actually manage this like a real game project, which it's not. It's a jam project. You can't manage it like a real project. So what we recommend is to plan only one step ahead. How do you do that?
Well, you have to plan steps that you can easily achieve in order to plan more steps. So what that would mean is if you have a wave-based shooter, the first step would be, can you get a player who is on the screen and can shoot? If you did that, great. Now you can go to the next step. And the next step may be getting an enemy, not even an AI that dodges your bullets and shoots you, but just an enemy that can be shot. Once that works, then maybe get a bunch that can be shot and then can also spawn in different waves to make it a wave-based shooter. Taking it one step at a time helps you follow the fun and see what feels good. Because if you spend, again, the whole time planning kind of the entire architecture of this whole game, then yes, maybe right at the very end, you do have a wave-based AI system and a player that can shoot. But if it's not fun, then you spend a lot of time doing that instead of figuring out what you could have done instead to make the game fun.
Right, and it is a lot easier to follow the fun when you're only worrying about the very next step. If you're sitting there at the very, very beginning of the jam worrying about, to use an example, the complex AI and how they're going to move, none of that matters until you've completed all the prerequisites to get to that point. And the other great thing about doing only one step at a time is that you have no idea what direction the game may suddenly take a turn at. One of the most recent jams that we did, the core game concept revolved around a mechanic that ended up just never getting implemented because we ran out of time, but also because we found something else fun in the game that we didn't anticipate while playtesting. And we just sort of ended up focusing on that one thing that we knew was fun instead of thinking, oh, but we planned to do this at the beginning, so we have to do this. No, you don't. If what you have right now is fun, just focus on that. Don't worry about the other thing. How do you make sure you get those individual tasks done?
So you really need to time box each step that you're working on. It's important that when you are talking with your team and you splitting up tasks and deciding what you're going to do, that you also decide when you're going to meet back up with each other, or at least have just a quick check-in to say, hey, I said I was going to get wave spawning stuff working in an hour, and then if someone comes back to you and they say, how's it going? And if you did good, then you can move on to the next step. And if not, then maybe you need to reevaluate what you're working on, make a new plan, or just if you need more time and that is feasible at that point in the project, then that's okay too. But at least you know. So you're going to want to just repeat that process throughout the whole jam until the game is done.
Mm-hmm. The worst thing that could happen is that someone goes off to do a core part of the game and no one decided, hey, like no one mutually decided with that person, hey, we're going to meet in 2 hours and discuss how you're doing on that. And then suddenly it's the end of the jam and they're like, hey, did you ever end up doing those enemies? And they're like, oh, I got stuck on this one thing I didn't know how to do. And then someone else on the team's like, I knew how to do that. I could have helped you. We could have talked about it. Those things really suck when it happens, but it happens a lot. And this is a kind of case where having a project lead can really help in making sure that someone's just checking in and that you're utilizing all your available resources to make sure your game is getting finished. But before your game can be finished, most jams are about 48 hours or so, sometimes more, sometimes less. But no matter how long or short they are, you probably need to eat and or sleep and or hydrate yourself at some point during this process. What kind of self-care habits do you make sure you take care of during a jam?
Just making sure that you eat complete meals. It's okay to snack, but you can't only snack. Stay hydrated, get plenty of water. Really know yourself and know when it's time to stop working. For me, I know that once I hit a certain point, I start feeling that I'm on a slow decline, and so I know that I need to wrap up what I'm doing and go to bed. And then plan to wake up at a reasonable time the next day as well, so that I can continue my work and not waste jam time by sleeping it away, and not waste jam time by underperforming at my task because I'm so sleep deprived I can't think.
Right. And that's an important part too in taking care of yourself, is communicating to your team members about when and how your self-care routine is going to work and reminding them to take care of themselves as well. You might see, a teammate who is saying, oh, you guys go to sleep, I'm going to stay up and finish the system, and then when you guys wake up, I'll do this. No, you gotta make sure that you're staying in contact with your team and encouraging each other to take care of yourselves. Everyone has their own limits, of course, but everyone's human. Everyone has pretty reasonable limits. If someone hasn't slept at all and it's been over 24 hours, that's a clear sign that someone needs to intervene and say, listen, the game will be fine. Go sleep. It'll be okay. And if you do end up needing extra time away, just make sure you've communicated to your teammates that, hey, I woke up, I told you guys I was going to come in at 8 a.m., but that's just not going to happen. I'm going to need a little bit longer. Can someone else cover this thing I was supposed to do? If you don't communicate to your team, no one can know what needs to be resolved and who needs to take care of what. So yeah, you have officially made it to the last 8 hours or so of the jam, the last 10% of the jam. And you have a game? Question mark? What do you do in the last 8 hours of a jam?
So at this point, it's time to stop adding new things, period, and look at the game and see the state. Can you play it? Does it work? And not, does someone have to force close the game to get out of the level that they just played? That's not a good thing. You need to be able to play the game and not get stuck, and have your core game done. So at that point, if you don't have that, or even if you have that and you're planning further things still, it's time to cut what you don't need and salvage what you can so that your game is still the game jam game. And you want to do that until you get to that state where you have a game that can be started, played, and finished.
Yeah, and it can be very painful to cut and salvage things from your game because whatever gets cut, somebody worked pretty hard on it, and it matters a lot to that individual. But this is something that you need to discuss with your team and make sure that everyone is on the same page about it and that everyone understands the ultimate goal is finishing a game. It doesn't matter how long I spent designing this really cool enemy. Maybe it has all these animation and all these other things. If there's no code for it to work in the game at all, these last hours are not the time that you want to spend adding that one enemy in when the amount of value and fun it's going to add to the game is only so much. And similarly, if someone's spent a whole lot of time trying to implement this complicated AI system on how the enemy is going to attack you and all that stuff, and you're down to 8 hours and it's just got bugs in it or it's just not feeling very fun, you're going to have to cut it. You just have to delete that code and write a much simpler version of that, salvage it into a simpler version so that the game is fun and playable. And that should just be on everyone's mind in those last 8 hours is playable, playable, playable. Not, oh, what about that goal? Oh, what about that goal? Oh, did we finish that idea? Oh, hey, that last bit still needs to get plugged in. If it hasn't gotten plugged in by this point, you're probably going to cause more trouble and more issues by trying to do that for a second. And then once you've reached the past 4 hours, what do you do then?
So now it's time to playtest the game. Make sure that it is fun. And this is you playtesting it a little bit, but also getting other people to play it and seeing what is either obviously wrong that you can easily fix, or what bugs pop up. And when I say things that are obviously wrong, I mean things that were not obvious to the player playing your game. So little pieces of text that you can just add on the screen, or if someone says, I can't see because the colors are way too bright, then maybe dialing back some of the colors or brightness in your game. Simple things like that, so that you can really just polish up and finish your game.
And no matter how good you may think you are at QA, you'll be surprised how often a developer will make a game and realize, oh, I never thought someone would turn left over here and crash the game. I had no idea that was going to happen.
They did.
So you really want to make sure that you get at least one person who hasn't been in the development team to just launch, play it, and let you know what needs fixing. And once you've gotten that done, or hopefully maybe even during the time that this is happening, always make sure you've got one person also working on your submission page. Most game jams require you to have some sort of submission page where you submit your game, whether it's on itch.io or the Global Game Jam. They tend to require having either a video or some screenshots at least of your game. And you want to make sure that you actually spend a little bit of time and care on those things. If it is a competitive jam, those elements can make or break your game. If you don't have decent screenshots to showcase the amazing game that you've made, maybe not as many people will play and rate it. If you don't have an engaging bio written about it or about your team, they may not take the game seriously. So you want to make sure that you haven't left too many things to the last second, especially things completely out of your control, like the entirety of itch.io going down, or the Global Game Jam site not being able to handle too many uploads all at once. Make sure that you have factored those critical last-second things into account to make sure that all this hard work that you've done actually gets submitted and played by other people. And once you've done that, once you've submitted it, you're done. And you get a chance to treat yourself and hang out with your team and celebrate what it is that you've made and make sure that you do celebrate what you've made, by the way. I think it's easy afterwards to be able to focus on what didn't get done, because a lot will not get done. A lot of the stuff that you thought about during or before the jam, you won't be able to fully accomplish. But if you did that first step correctly, if you set those clear and concise goals that determine your success, chances are you at least accomplished some amount, if not all of your own goals, and you should celebrate that and celebrate your teammates' ability to complete their own goals as well. What else do you recommend doing after jam's over?
So what's really fun and helpful even is going into the Jam's website that you were a part of and playing other people's games. You'll find that a lot of times the more you play people's games, the more likely they are to play your game as well. And then what you have is just a really cool feedback loop of playing games and then both giving and receiving feedback. And it's been a trend lately for people to stream themselves playing other people's game jam games, and it's been a fun time doing that too.
And this is, he already mentioned it, but it's a good opportunity to grow from this. It's a good place to kind of reflect on the jam and your experiences in it and what you can do to improve so that hopefully the next time you do a jam, it will be even better. If you just submit and then pass out and just ignore the results of the jam and ignore everyone else's games, chances are you're not going to learn anything valuable to be able to grow from for the next time around. So make sure you do spend a little bit of time to just reflect on that. So that is all we have to discuss about succeeding at jams. Thank you everyone for coming to our talk, and we should be hanging out in the Discord chat, wherever it is, to answer some questions. Bye.